Ben Shapiro needed precisely 4 minutes and 17 seconds to cause Ilhan Omar to rue the moment she agreed to a contest where truth outweighed narratives of victimization. For weeks, the CNN special event had been advertised as the future of America, a discussion on policy and morals that appeared to be premier television viewing. The stage was set for Ben Shapiro, the conservative commentator famous for his swift factual dismantling, against Representative Ilhan Omar, the progressive lawmaker noted for emotive pleas and identity-based politics. The network had anticipated a polite exchange, a rigorous trading of concepts, and perhaps a few shareable clips that would appease viewers on both sides of the political spectrum. Instead, they broadcast a slaughter, a structured and methodical destruction based on evidence that left Omar's arguments in tatters and placed her political future in grave danger. Omar entered the arena with the self-assurance of a figure who had spent years sheltered by a supportive press, guarded by identity politics, and protected from genuine examination by the progressive hierarchy. She had encountered difficult inquiries in the past, yet she had consistently managed to pivot with charges of bigotry or Islamophobia, or by utilizing the strategy of playing the victim. Her standard arguments were prepared, focusing on lived experiences, disenfranchised groups, and the necessity of prioritizing empathy over cold, hard proof. Shapiro, by contrast, stepped onto the platform carrying a computer, a pile of records, and that faintly entertained look he adopts when he realizes he is about to instruct someone who urgently requires it. He sported his trademark yarmulke, a visible signal that when she attacked Jews and Israel, she was targeting an individual who could retort with both personal investment and crushing reality. The moderator, Jake Tapper, appeared anxious, and he had every reason to be as the two participants delivered their introductory remarks. Omar spoke with fervor regarding her path as a refugee, her role in speaking for ignored populations, and her battle for fairness and equality. It was an effective address, rehearsed and emotive, intended to pull at heartstrings while securing her position of moral superiority. Then Shapiro took his turn, thanking Congresswoman Omar for her touching opening while noting that he appreciated her personal story, but emphasizing that individual tales are not the same as empirical facts. Lived history does not supersede proof. Emotions do not outrank statistics. And being insulted does not automatically make one correct. He proposed they examine her actual history, revealing that he had spent several weeks gathering her voting records, her declarations, her financial filings, her public remarks, and her policy stances. He announced he had numerous inquiries and intended to speak rapidly because he had substantial facts to address, and she had a significant amount of explaining to do. The spectators adjusted in their chairs as Omar's grin wavered slightly, while Tapper looked as if he was already second-guessing his decision to accept this moderating role. What followed transformed into the most viewed political argument of the decade, not due to its competitiveness, but because it was an absolute and complete annihilation supported by facts, figures, and receipts Shapiro had been gathering for years. Shapiro did not squander time on pleasantries, projecting a timeline onto the screen behind him, clicking his computer, and beginning what could only be defined as a prosecutor's opening statement delivered with the velocity of an auctioneer reading a criminal charge. He suggested they begin with her marriages, noting the plural because the situation was more intricate than a Christopher Nolan film and less plausible than a Marvel storyline. In 2002, she entered a religious union with Ahmed Abdi Salan Hirsi, which was not legally recorded by the government, though she referred to him as her husband. They had children together, representing the great American dream, Shapiro noted as his hands gestured toward the timeline displayed on the monitor. Then, in 2009, She legally wed Ahmed Nur Saeed Elmi, and this is where the situation becomes intriguing, by which he meant statistically impossible to justify as innocent. Mr. Elmi arrived in the United States on a student visa in 2009, and weeks later, he married her. A fact that alone provokes questions, since marrying a citizen is the quickest route to permanent residency. One might call the timing convenient, and although Omar attempted to interject, Shapiro spoke with increased velocity to continue his point. After wedding Mr. Elmi, she resided at a different location, not the same house, while her children were registered in school using Mr. Elmi's address as their main home, even though she was not living there. She was actually residing with Mr. Butter, her C, yet she maintained shared bank accounts with Mr. Elm despite the separate households, as he clicked to the subsequent batch of financial records. Then, in 2014 and 2015, while still legally the wife of Mr. Elmi, she submitted joint tax filings with Mr. Hersey, which is not an ambiguous legal area. Congresswoman, one cannot submit joint tax forms with an individual one is not legally wed to, as that constitutes tax fraud, and every return she signed contained a clause stating it was signed under penalty of perjury. You signed at least 2 fraudulent tax returns, which equates to 2 felony charges right there, Shapiro stated as he displayed a sequence of immigration files on the large monitor. In 2017, she divorced Mr. Elma, and in 2018 she legally wed Mr. Hersey, the very man she had been cohabitating with and filing illegal tax forms with, while she was still the spouse of another man. All of these details have resulted in grave public inquiries regarding whether Mr. Elmi is in fact her sibling, as has been widely suggested and substantiated by researchers. She has continuously declined to undergo a DNA examination that would conclusively refute this accusation if it were untrue, raising the question of why she does not simply take the test to cease the rumors. Unless, naturally, the rumors are completely correct, he said, turning to face her directly and leaning into the stand to present the statistical reality to the crowd. The likelihood of this entire sequence, including the timing of the student visa, the residences, the tax filings, the school documents, and the bank records being a harmless coincidence, is roughly 0.1%. He noted he was being exceptionally charitable with that calculation, adding that she would have better chances of securing the lottery jackpot while simultaneously being hit by lightning. These are not merely private errors, Congresswoman, but rather a design of deliberate deceit, causing Omar's face to flush visibly as she grasped the edges of her podium. She retorted that these were bigoted conspiracy theories, pushed by right-wing radicals to invalidate her presence in the legislature. But Shapiro instantly raised his palm to interrupt her. Halt immediately, because facts are not bigoted. Documents are not bigoted. And her own autographs on federal paperwork are not bigoted. Mathematics is not prejudiced. Bank statements demonstrating she held joint accounts with Mr. Elmi, despite residing apart, are not prejudiced, and they are simply files. Immigration papers displaying a visa timeline are not prejudiced, and tax returns with her signature filing jointly with Mr. Hersey, while she was legally wed to Mr. Elme, are not prejudiced. They constitute proof of federal offenses, he said, leaning in and speaking even more rapidly now, the words impacting like a drumbeat. What is genuinely prejudiced is the presumption that she should receive an exemption on possible federal crimes due to her identity, as equal justice under the law is the phrase inscribed on the Supreme Court. That principle, embedded in the Constitution she swore to defend, signifies that every individual answers for their behavior identically, meaning she is not unique, she is not excluded, and she is not the victim in this situation. She is a government official, who is required to clarify why her marriage history, her residences, her tax filings, her bank statements, and her rejection of a DNA test all point to a trio of immigration fraud, tax fraud, and perjury. Omar attempted to recover her balance, asserting that the accusations regarding her brother had been comprehensively disproven by numerous media outlets. By whom? Shapiro fired back before she could complete her sentence, noting it was not disproven by her taking a DNA exam nor by her supplying paperwork that refutes the family connection. It was not disproven by her providing any justification for the separate homes, the shared accounts, or the fraudulent tax filings, as she has simply announced it, debunked while withholding the specific evidence that would truly disprove it. That is not how reality functions, and that is definitely not how evidence functions, as one cannot merely utter the word debunked and anticipate that physical proof will disappear into the atmosphere. Here is what is known for a fact, regardless of the sibling accusations. We know she wed Mr. Elmi weeks after his arrival on a student visa, and we know they resided apart. We know her children were registered at his home. We know they shared accounts, and we know she submitted false tax returns, which are recorded facts implying federal offenses. Therefore, either she is the most unfortunate individual in the history of American politics with the most serendipitously dubious pattern of conduct, or she committed immigration fraud, tax fraud, and perjury. The auditorium dropped into a profound quiet as Omar glanced toward Tapper for assistance, but Tapper was gazing down at his papers as though they might hold an exit strategy for both of them. Shapiro did not grant Omar any moment to recuperate, displaying a gigantic spreadsheet on the monitor with columns of figures and dates that caused the audience's eyes to expand. He proposed they discuss her daughter's consulting agency, then corrected himself to say they should discuss her family's money laundering scheme, which was masquerading as a consulting business. He stated he would present this in the shape of a mathematics problem, acknowledging it might be difficult, but asking her to follow along as he gestured to the spreadsheet. This data comes from Federal Election Commission reports between 2018 and 2020, showing her campaign disbursed $2.7 million to a business named the E Street Group. The E Street Group is managed by Tim Minette, who is currently her spouse, and Shapiro proceeded to determine the standard market prices by clicking to a fresh slide. The services rendered, including slate mailers and digital strategy advice, have known market values, and he had contacted 10 political consulting agencies to obtain estimates for the tier of service her campaign was given. The going rate is roughly $5,000 to $10,000 per election period, yet she paid between $75,000 and $150,000 per cycle, which is 15 times the standard cost. He began computing on the display with numbers blinking in red, showing that over the relevant time frame, the market value for services provided was roughly $300,000. The sum actually disbursed was $2.7 million, meaning the surplus payment was $2.4 million, which is not a calculation mistake nor a surcharge for superior work. That represents the transformation of campaign donations into private family revenue by enormously overpaying for services, Shapiro explained as he brought up comparative statistics from other congressional contests. Let us examine other campaigns, noting that other Congress members competing in comparable districts with similar funds paid an average of $180,000 for similar work during the same time frame. She paid $2.7 million, which is 15 times what her peers paid, and the sole factor that excuses that excess is that the funds were directed to someone personally linked to her. He advanced through additional data with his tempo increasing, remarking that the situation improves when one reviews the timeline starting with the initial payment to the E Street Group in April of 2018. In June of 2018, she and Mr. Minot were photographed together in Los Angeles, while both were wed to other individuals. And by September 2019, both had submitted divorce papers. From October 2019 through March 2020, payments to the E Street Group surged to over $600,000 in a mere 6 months, and in November 2020 she married Mr. Minot. Shapiro faced Omar with an expression of feigned inquisitiveness, noting that the disbursements began when their relationship began and rose drastically as their relationship progressed. The payments resulted in over $2 million being disbursed above market standards. And now she is wed to the individual receiving the cash, which is not consulting, but rather campaign fund conversion for private gain via a romance. He displayed FEC complaint records, noting that numerous grievances had been lodged regarding these transactions because the FEC has explicit regulations barring the personal usage of campaign money. One cannot utilize donor funds for private advantage, but if one overpays a consultant who is also a romantic partner by $2 million, it is functionally identical. She is simply channeling it through a business rather than writing herself a check, and Shapiro began rapidly moving through the financial breakdown one more time. Let us clarify the mathematics for the spectators. The total paid was $2.7 million. $7 million. The market value was $300,000, and the overpayment was $2.4 million. If we presume this excess payment went to benefit her personally through her connection with Mr. Minot, that is $2.4 million in campaign money converted to private use. That constitutes a breach of federal election statutes and is potentially criminal theft of campaign resources, though Omar attempted to defend herself by asserting the FEC examined the payments. Shapiro interrupted immediately to clarify that the FEC authorized payments to a consulting agency, but they did not authorize paying 15 times the market price. That is the fraud, exploiting a loophole by overpaying, because being technically lawful does not make it moral, and it does not alter the reality that she enriched someone personally linked to her with donor cash. He displayed the donor rolls listing the names of ordinary laborers, pointing out that these are her contributors, working individuals who donated $25, $50, or $100 because they trusted she would battle for them. Instead, she provided $2.4 million in surplus payments to her romantic partner's business, which is not fighting for the working class, but rather exploiting their contributions to enrich herself and her kin. The fundamental truth is that the market price was $300,000, and she paid $2.7 million. And if he or any Republican did this, she would be demanding a prosecution. However, when she commits the act, she believes it is permissible, but it is actually corruption, quantifiable, mathematical, verifiable corruption, and the electorate deserves to know she is enriching her family with their gifts. Shapiro's expression altered, becoming significantly frostier, as this was personal now and everyone in the hall could sense the temperature plummet. When he spoke once more, his voice possessed a sharpness it had not held in the prior rounds as he announced they were arriving at his preferred subject. He introduced the topic of her opinions on Jews and Israel with intense, cutting sarcasm, noting that as a Jewish man who wears a yarmulke and is pro-Israel, he tends to observe when she spends years demonstrating anti-Semitism. He suggested they review her greatest hits, which he had organized by date so the audience could observe the pattern of intolerance unfold, as he projected a collection of tweet archives on the giant monitors. In November 2012, before she was even in Congress, she tweeted that Israel had hypnotized the globe and asked Allah to awaken the people to see the evil deeds of Israel. He asked to examine the phrase, hypnotize the world, identifying it as traditional anti-Semitic imagery regarding Jewish psychological control. It is a stereotype that dates back centuries, the notion of Jews covertly directing global events via hypnosis or manipulation, and she utilized that precise trope regarding the world's only Jewish nation. Shapiro clicked to the subsequent tweet before she could reply, showing that in February 2019, she tweeted that it was all about the Benjamins in response to a query about why U.S. politicians back Israel. That is another vintage anti-Semitic stereotype regarding Jews utilizing wealth to dominate politics. And when criticized by members of her own party, including Jewish Democrats, she released a non-apology claiming ignorance. She claimed she did not realize it was insulting, but she knew, she absolutely knew, he said as he displayed more declarations with his tempo increasing. She has likened Israel to the Taliban. She has compared Israel to terrorist groups, and she has characterized Israeli security precautions as evil and apartheid. Strangely, she has never employed this language regarding China, which maintains actual concentration camps for Uyghurs, nor about Iran, which stones women, nor about Saudi Arabia, which possesses zero religious liberty. She saves her most severe and vitriolic rhetoric exclusively for the sole Jewish state, Shapiro noted as he displayed her actual voting history. She voted against funding for the Iron Dome, which is a purely defensive network that intercepts rockets launched at Israeli civilians and does not kill anyone, but merely stops Israelis from being killed. He asked why she voted against funding it, questioning what possible motive she could have for resisting a defensive system that preserves civilian lives unless she does not wish for those specific civilians to survive. He clicked through additional votes with the data appearing in rapid sequence, noting she voted against resolutions denouncing BDS, a campaign that aims for the complete removal of Israel as a Jewish nation. She has resisted designating terrorist groups as terrorists when those groups attack Jews, and she has backed UN resolutions denouncing Israel while resisting resolutions denouncing actual cruel human rights violators. Shapiro then presented statistics from the Anti-Defamation League, explaining that the ADL monitors anti-Semitic occurrences and that following her Benjamin's tweet, such incidents surged by 23% in a 2-week span. Her rhetoric correlates immediately with rises in anti-Semitic assaults, meaning her words have repercussions and Jewish Americans encounter violence because her words encourage the aggressors. He pivoted to face Omar squarely, with his eyes narrowing, stating she has invoked mind control, invoked monetary manipulation, and minimized terrorism against Jews. He promised to address her comment about some people doing something shortly, but first noted she has likened the Jewish state to the Taliban, and when challenged, she hides behind the pretext of policy critique. She claims to criticize Israeli policy constantly and criticizes the Israeli government often. But Shapiro retorted that he does not utilize language from the protocols of the elders of Zion to do so. He does not summon centuries-old anti-Semitic stereotypes, nor does he liken Israel to terrorist groups while granting actual terrorist-supporting regimes a pass, which is the distinction between valid policy critique and anti-Semitism. Omar attempted to interrupt by asserting her right to critique the Israeli government without being branded. But Shapiro was almost yelling now, with his words arriving even faster. Critique all you want. Critique the settlements. Critique the administration. And critique specific laws. But when she says Jews have hypnotized the world, that is not policy critique. That is blood libel. When she says it is all about the Benjamins, that is not policy critique. That is invoking the myth of Jewish money dominating politics. When she compares Israel to the Taliban, while Israel is the sole democracy in the Middle East with equal rights for women and LGBT individuals, that is not policy critique. That is an anti-Semitic fixation. Her own party leadership has admonished her, yet she never actually changes. She simply becomes more cautious with her wording while sustaining the same anti-Jewish hostility. She has a problem with Jews, Congresswoman, and her words demonstrate it. Her votes demonstrate it. And her selective anger demonstrates it. Shapiro's face was stern as he brought up audio files, video segments, and voting records, noting that this round was plainly intended to challenge Omar's basic allegiance to the nation that had granted her shelter. He proposed they discuss her oath of office, his voice slicing through the tension, stating he had the text, and it is remarkably brief. It states she solemnly swears to support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. But he noted it does not say support and defend Somalia. He suggested they talk about where her loyalties truly reside as he pressed play on an audio recording, and Omar's voice resonated through the room saying she is Somali first, Muslim second, and American third. Shapiro halted the recording instantly, pointing out that was her speaking to a Somali community group in 2023, stating she is Somali first and American third. Those are not his words describing her stance, those are her own words, and her oath states she will defend the U.S. Constitution, but apparently that duty falls to a distant third place. He brought up her voting history to align her words with her deeds, asking to observe the pattern that every time there is a vote concerning the Horn of Africa, she aligns with Somalia over U.S. allies. In the case of Ethiopia, a crucial U.S. partner in counterterrorism versus Somalia, she sides with Somalia, and in the case of Kenya, another U.S. ally versus Somalia in a land dispute, she sides with Somalia. When the State Department advised sanctions on Somali officials for flagrant corruption, she resisted them, and she opposed military action against al-Shabaab, a Somali terrorist group responsible for thousands of fatalities. She has steadily voted against classifying them as terrorists, and every single time she aligns with Somalia against American interests, Shapiro noted as he displayed a series of meeting logs. She met with Somali government figures before official U.S. delegations even arrived, and she discussed U.S. policy toward Somalia before being briefed by her own State Department. She has campaigned for positions perfectly matched with the Somali government before those positions were even introduced to her via official channels, raising the question of how she knew exactly what to advocate unless she was being briefed by a foreign power. He then pivoted to campaign finance, noting her campaign has accepted substantial donations from persons with recorded links to the Somali government. The pattern is obvious. Money travels from Somalia-connected individuals to her campaign, and she advocates for Somalia-aligned positions in exchange. He looked at Omar with an expression of acute intensity, asking which side she prioritizes when U.S. interests clash with Somali interests. Her voting record says Somalia, her public declarations of Somali first and American third say Somalia, and her meetings and advocacy say Somalia. Her oath says America, but her behavior says Somalia, which is not representing her constituents, but rather functioning as a representative for a foreign nation. Omar shook her head, asserting she was representing the interests of her Somali-American constituents, but Shapiro cut her off, saying they are Americans who happen to possess Somali heritage. She represents Americans, and when she takes an oath to America, she owes her allegiance to America, meaning she does not get to divide her loyalty. She arrived in America as a refugee, Shapiro continued with his voice elevating, and America provided her safety when Somalia could not. America provided her opportunity, education, and the liberty to run for office, and she replied by stating, America comes third. "That is not gratitude, it is a betrayal of the faith placed in her," he said, pointing to her voting data one final time. When U.S. interests and Somali interests deviate, she selects Somalia, which is not a coincidence, but the prioritization of a foreign country over her oath of office. Imagine any other member of Congress stating they were another nationality first and American third. The response would be universal denunciation, but when she does it, we are expected to disregard it. There are no equal standards, but her oath is to America, and her loyalty ought to be to America, period. Shapiro's face was stern now, as this was the instant everyone in the hall had been anticipating, the confrontation regarding the most insulting statement Omar had ever spoken in public office. He proposed they discuss September 11th, 2001, his voice lowering to a deep, intense frequency, describing it as the worst terrorist assault in American history and the day that altered everything. Most Americans recall precisely where they were, and he was 13 years old, remembering nearly 3,000 Americans murdered by 19 al-Qaeda terrorists. 4 aircraft were hijacked, 2 towers fell, the Pentagon was struck, and heroes in Pennsylvania halted a 4th strike, leaving the event seared into our collective memory. But she, Congresswoman, has described it differently, he said as he clicked his laptop and a video clip filled the screen. It was Omar speaking at a CARE event, her voice reverberating through the speakers saying CARE was founded after 9/11 because they recognized that some people did something and that all of us were starting to lose access to our civil liberties. Shapiro paused the video instantly to repeat the phrase, "Some people did something," noting that is how she described September 11th. Let us analyze that phrase word by word. Some people, not 19 al-Qaeda terrorists, not specific monsters with names and faces who selected evil, but just some people. It sounds as if they were a random sampling of humanity, and he clicked through more of her public declarations with a side-by-side comparison appearing on the displays. He suggested they compare how she describes other tragedies, such as the Christchurch mosque shooting, which she called terrorism rooted in white supremacy, while speaking about the massacre of 50 innocent Muslims. She was specific, detailed, and passionate, just as she was with the El Paso shooting, which she called white nationalist terrorism and a racist attack targeting Latinos. Again, there were specific perpetrators, specific victims, and specific evil, and Shapiro's hands were moving rapidly now. Regarding George Floyd, she spoke for hours with detailed descriptions of injustice, racism, specific officers, and specific actions. She is capable of specificity when it suits her narrative, he noted, turning back to the 9/11 quote. But for the worst terrorist attack in American history, it is just some people did something. It was not al-Qaeda terrorists hijacking planes and murdering 2,077 Americans, nor 19 jihadists committing mass murder, but just some people did something. It sounds as if they littered or cut in line or were mildly rude, and he claimed to have statements from first responders, firefighters who were there, police officers who ran toward the towers, and paramedics who treated victims. They heard her comment, and their reaction was that it felt like being stabbed again, like their sacrifice was being minimized, and like the worst day of their lives was being reduced to a footnote. Shapiro then displayed letters from 9/11 families, including widows, children who lost parents, and parents who lost children. One woman wrote that she watched her husband die on live television, yet Omar calls it some people doing something rather than terrorists murdering him. Say their names and honor the victims by naming the evil, but she did not say their names, Ilhan. She did not describe what they did. She minimized it, and she did it at an event for CAIR, the Council on American-Islamic Relations. This is an organization named as an unindicted co-conspirator in the largest terrorism financing trial in American history, an organization with multiple officials convicted of terrorism-related charges. She chose to speak at their event, where she minimized 9/11 while defending CARE's founding. Yet 19 al-Qaeda terrorists hijacked 4 planes and murdered nearly 3,000 people. That is not some people doing something. That is specific evil. And while she describes white supremacist attacks with passionate specificity, when the perpetrators are Muslim terrorists, she uses passive, vague language. The reason is that naming them and their ideology would complicate her politics, so she minimizes and reduces mass murder to a something. She then immediately pivots to how Muslims were the real victims because they faced scrutiny afterward. But nearly 3,000 people died, and families are still grieving. Her takeaway is that all of us were starting to lose access to our civil liberties, which is not empathy, Congresswoman. It is moral bankruptcy. Shapiro shifted gears, moving from moral and national security questions to purely intellectual ones, his expression taking on a pedantic sharpness, signaling he was about to provide an education whether Omar wanted it or not. He proposed they test her understanding of basic economics because she is out there making economic policy for 330 million people, despite apparently not understanding how a balance sheet functions. She was one of the loudest voices celebrating when she helped kill the Amazon HQ2 tour deal in New York. So he issued a pop quiz asking what exactly a tax incentive is. Omar blinked while adjusting her microphone and began to say, "A tax incentive is when the government gives corporations money." But Shapiro held up his hand, cutting her off instantly. She had already failed the quiz, because the government does not give anything in a tax incentive, and he offered to explain how this actually works for the people at home. He suggested she might want to take notes, because this is important, as he pulled up a simple high-contrast diagram on the screen. A tax incentive means a company pays less in taxes than they otherwise would, meaning it is not money the government currently possesses, nor cash sitting in a bank account. It is future revenue that the government agrees not to collect in exchange for massive economic activity. So if the company does not come, that revenue does not exist. It is zero, nothing. But if the company does come with incentives, the government gets some revenue, and some is more than zero, which is basic math. Shapiro pulled up the specific numbers from the Amazon deal, listing Amazon HQ2 in New York with 25,000 to 40,000 jobs and an average salary of $150,000. There were $3 billion in tax incentives over 10 years, and she celebrated killing this saying, "We saved $3 billion. So he proposed they check her math. He started writing on the digital whiteboard, showing that if Amazon does not come, the tax revenue from those 25,000 jobs is zero. The corporate tax from Amazon is zero, the local economic activity is zero, and the total benefit to New York is zero. Now, if Amazon comes with those $3 billion in incentives, the income tax revenue alone from 25,000 jobs paying $150,000 is approximately $400 million per year. Over 10 years, that is $4 billion in income tax revenue for the city and state. So New York agrees not to collect $3 billion in order to gain $4 billion in income taxes. That is a net gain of $1 billion. But Amazon also pays corporate taxes and property taxes. And those 25,000 employees spend money in the local economy generating sales tax. The total new revenue for New York was estimated at $8 billion, but she told the public she saved $3 billion. She did not save a dime because that $3 billion never existed. It was a discount on a bill that now will never be sent. By killing the deal, she cost New York $8 billion in revenue, meaning she did not save money, but rather set a pile of potential billions on fire. She fails to understand the difference between not collecting future money and spending current money, he noted, clicking through more analysis. Economists across the political spectrum, including left, right, and independent, all agreed this was a massive net positive for New York. But let us talk about the people, not the numbers. Specifically, 25,000 jobs with a $150,000 average salary. Those are not just corporate executives. Those are programmers, HR staff, security guards, cafeteria workers, and administrators, representing middle-class jobs that support families. She killed 25,000 opportunities for working people because she thought a tax incentive was a check being written to Jeff Bezos. That is not just wrong, Congresswoman. That is dangerous economic illiteracy in a position of power. She is using words like welfare and incentive interchangeably, and it is costing the American people their livelihoods. Shapiro pulled up what looked like a budget breakdown on steroids, a wall of numbers, calculations, and devastating projections that made the audience collectively wince. He announced they would discuss her actual policy proposals, presenting them to explain what they would actually do using real arithmetic, and then asking her to defend the math. He clicked through the slides with rhythmic precision, starting with Medicare for All, which she co-sponsored. The estimated cost, according to the Urban Institute, is $32 trillion over 10 years, while currently total federal revenue is approximately $4.5 trillion per year. That equals $45 trillion over a decade, which means Medicare for All alone would consume 71% of all federal revenue. That leaves exactly 29% for everything else, including defense, Social Security, infrastructure, and the very existence of the government. But we are just getting started. Regarding the Green New Deal, which she also co-sponsored, the cost estimate by the American Action Forum is $93 trillion over 10 years. Adding those together, 32 plus 93 equals $125 trillion. Yet her projected federal revenue is $45 trillion. She is proposing to spend $125 trillion when she only has $45 trillion, meaning she is short $80 trillion. He started calculating on the screen with his fingers flying, proposing to see if they could find that $80 trillion. The total wealth of all American billionaires combined is approximately $4.5 trillion. So confiscate every single penny of it and seize their assets. Take everything, and she has funded her proposals for approximately 4 months. Then, what does she do? Tax corporations, considering total corporate profits, are approximately $2 trillion per year, and tax them at 100%. To put every corporation in America out of business. Crash the stock market and end the private sector, and she gets $20 trillion over 10 years, but she is still $60 trillion short. Shapiro pulled up more analysis shifting from the cost to the consequences, suggesting they talk about what her proposals would actually do to people. Medicare for All eliminates private insurance, meaning 150 million Americans lose their current coverage. Healthcare costs do not decrease. They are just paid by the government instead of private entities, and quality decreases. Government-run systems always reduce quality and increase wait times, so just ask anyone in the UK or Canada. Then there is Defund the Police, which she supported, and in Minneapolis, her own district implemented it, with the result being that crime increased 40%. Murders are up, assaults are up, property crime is up, businesses are leaving, and people are fleeing. The victims are overwhelmingly the minority communities she claims to represent, meaning her policy literally hurt them. He was on a roll now with the momentum building, noting she supports open borders, abolishing ICE, and decriminalizing all illegal border crossings. The cost of illegal immigration, according to FAIR, is approximately $100 billion per year in healthcare, education, and social services. She wants to increase that cost while making it easier to enter. And then there is free college at approximately $80 billion per year. Who benefits is mostly middle and upper middle class students, but who pays is everyone through taxes. She is proposing a massive transfer of wealth from working class people who did not go to college to relatively privileged students who did. The same goes for student loan forgiveness at $1.7 trillion, as she is asking a plumber in Ohio to pay for the graduate degree of a lawyer in D.C. That is not progressive. It is regressive, Shapiro said, turning to face Omar with an expression of sharp disbelief. Every policy she supports has the same three problems: massive cost, zero funding mechanism, and disastrous outcomes. She has proposed policies costing $125 trillion, when the revenue is $45 trillion. Even if she taxed every billionaire and every corporation out of existence, she is still $60 trillion short. Her proposals are not ambitious, Congresswoman. They are mathematically impossible fairy tales. They are economic fantasies that would bankrupt the country in a matter of months. Omar tried to respond with a strained voice, saying, "We have to be ambitious about transforming our economy to work for everyone." "Ambitious does not mean impossible," Shapiro shouted finally, letting his volume match his speed. "And ambitious does not mean ignoring basic arithmetic. You can be as ambitious as you want, but you still have to fund your proposals with actual money that actually exists. You cannot just wave a magic wand and make $80 trillion appear out of thin air. When her policies are actually implemented, like defund the police, people die, crime increases, and communities suffer. These are not just bad ideas. They are dangerous delusions dressed up as policy, and the math shows they are a total fiction." Shapiro stood up, gathering every document, spreadsheet, and chart he had used throughout the debate, and stacked them into a single imposing pile on the lectern. This was the moment of total synthesis, the comprehensive destruction of Ilhan Omar's career delivered at maximum speed. "Let us review her career, Congresswoman," he said with his voice reaching a crescendo of intensity. He stated he would speak quickly because there is a lot to cover, and almost all of it is terrible, so she should pay attention. "Marriage fraud," Shapiro began, with the words hitting like hammer blows, noting she married Ahmed Elmi under highly suspicious circumstances suggesting immigration fraud. She lived at separate addresses, her children were listed at his residence, she had joint accounts, and she filed false tax returns with Ahmed Hersi while still legally married to Elmi. She has refused DNA testing that would settle the matter instantly, and the statistical probability of this being an innocent coincidence is effectively zero. That is, immigration fraud, tax fraud, and perjury, representing multiple federal felonies, and he did not slow down for a second. Family enrichment, he continued, noting she paid Tim Manette's company $2.7 million for services worth roughly $300,000. That is a $2.4 million overpayment to a man she was romantically involved with and eventually married. That is a campaign fund conversion to personal benefit, which is corruption quantified. Regarding anti-Semitism, she has invoked tropes of hypnosis and money control, compared Israel to the Taliban, and minimized terrorism against Jews. She opposed defensive systems that protect civilians, and her rhetoric correlates with spikes in anti-Semitic violence. Members of her own party have condemned her, meaning that is not policy criticism, it is blatant bigotry. Shapiro was accelerating now, with his voice filled with an edge of moral indignation regarding foreign loyalty. She said Somali first and American third. She consistently voted for Somali interests over American ones, and she met with their officials before our own State Department. She received donations from Somali-connected individuals while advocating for their government's positions, which is a violation of her oath. Regarding 9/11 minimization, she called the worst terrorist attack in our history. Some people did something while speaking for an organization with documented terror links. She has never truly apologized to the first responders or the families who felt stabbed by her words, which is moral bankruptcy. Economic illiteracy, he continued, gesturing toward the spreadsheets, noting she killed 25,000 jobs in New York because she does not understand how tax incentives work. She proposed $125 trillion in spending with only $45 trillion in revenue, meaning she is $80 trillion short of reality. Her policies, when implemented, increase crime and hurt the very communities she claims to represent, which is dangerous ignorance in a position of power. Ethics violations include being fined by the Minnesota Campaign Finance Board and investigated for misusing funds and potentially violating FAR regulations. She has enriched her family, violated rules, and faced minimal consequences because she hides behind identity politics every time someone presents the facts. Shapiro looked directly at Omar, who sat in stunned silence, offering her career in summary. America took her in as a refugee. It gave her safety, opportunity, and power. She responded by potentially committing immigration fraud, enriching her family with donor money, using anti-Semitic rhetoric, and saying America comes third in her loyalties. She has minimized terrorism, killed jobs through ignorance, and proposed impossible policies that would destroy the economy. She has weaponized identity to shield herself from accountability and used victimhood to deflect from corruption. She has taken everything America gave her and spat in its face, he said, looking at the camera for his final statement. The facts don't care about your feelings, Congresswoman. They don't care about your identity. The facts show potential felonies, family corruption, bigotry, and a betrayal of her oath. She had every advantage this country could give, and she squandered it on destruction and self-interest. The American people deserve better than her, and the data proves it beyond any reasonable doubt. The room sat in an absolute heavy silence as Shapiro sat back down. Omar looked like she had been hit by an intellectual freight train traveling at 200 words per minute. Within 72 hours, the debate had accumulated over 150 million views. 73% of viewers, including a significant portion of independents and Democrats, admitted Shapiro had won decisively. Within weeks, the House Ethics Committee and the FBI confirmed they were reviewing the evidence presented on national television. A primary challenger emerged, a Somali-American veteran running on America First. 6 months later, Omar lost her seat by 23 points. Her career was built on the sand of identity politics, and it took Ben Shapiro 2 hours to wash it away with the tide of facts. In her bitter concession speech, she blamed the usual specters of racism and Islamophobia, but she never acknowledged what Shapiro had documented. Shapiro, when asked about it on his podcast, was characteristically direct, saying he didn't end her career. Her conduct ended her career. He just made sure people saw the facts.